I was halfway through my glass of wine when my brother leaned in, his voice low, brittle, like it might shatter. "They're here to hurt you." He didn't blink. His eyes, normally soft with mischief and laughter, were stone cold, distant, sharp, calculating. And just like that, the music in the backyard felt too loud. The laughter, too staged. The lights, too bright. My stomach flipped, not from the wine, but from something ancient and animal. Fear. The Lancaster family reunion was supposed to be a celebration. My parents' 50th anniversary. Balloons tied to the iron gate. Tables full of catered food no one touched. Distant cousins I hadn't seen in years, circling like well-dressed vultures. I'd worn a soft yellow silk dress I hadn't dared wear in ages, trying to feel like sunshine. But now, I just felt exposed. "Don't look scared. Smile," Ben said through clenched teeth, his hand brushing mine under the table like we were kids hiding notes in church again. "Get your purse. We're leaving. Now." I blinked at him, my body frozen in place. My brother, who once cried during Finding Nemo, now looked like a man at war. What was I missing? What had I walked into? 3 hours earlier, I was in front of my vanity, curling a stubborn strand of hair. The sun was still high over Charleston, the heat clinging to the windows, but I was determined to look calm, polished, untouchable. I hadn't been back to my parents' home in almost 5 years. Not since that Christmas Eve when Mom called me a liar. Not since Dad pretended he didn't see me crying in the kitchen while my ex-husband charmed the whole family. They'd all taken his side, even after everything, after what he did to me. But today wasn't about old wounds, I told myself. It was about my parents, about moving forward. I even brought a gift, a hand-painted portrait of them on their wedding day. I wrapped it in gold tissue paper and tied it with a ribbon so tight it felt like a promise. Ben had texted that morning. "Let's stick close today, eyes open." I thought he was just being protective. My big brother, always the bodyguard. Now I wonder if he knew. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked just like I remembered. White shutters, wide porch, too many hydrangeas. My mother always had a thing for appearances. Inside, I could already hear laughter, glasses clinking, Sinatra on the speakers like clockwork. I walked through the front door and it felt like stepping into a memory, but one with jagged edges. Aunt Rose kissed my cheek like she hadn't called me a drama queen behind my back. Cousin Denise complimented my dress with a tone sweet as syrup and just as sticky. My parents posed for photos like royalty, Dad with his glass of scotch, Mom in a cream lace dress that matched the drapes. And then there was him, my ex-husband, Mark, standing by the bar, holding court like a politician, and not alone. Beside him stood my sister, Claire. Yes, my own sister. Wearing the same perfume I used to wear, wearing his ring. I nearly dropped the wine flute I had just accepted from the server. Claire gave me a smile I'll never forget, wide, practiced, hollow, like she had already won. Ben was beside me in an instant, his hand on my elbow. "Keep it together," he whispered. I swallowed hard and nodded. I didn't want to cause a scene. Not yet. Not until I understood what the hell was going on. The next 2 hours were a blur. I tried to sit still through toasts, small talk, and veiled insults from people who barely looked me in the eye. I tried not to stare at Mark's hand on Claire's back, or the way my mother smiled at them like they were the new golden couple. I felt like a ghost at my own funeral. Then, as I was seated at the long banquet table, picking at my salad and trying not to cry, Ben slipped into the chair beside me. He didn't smile. He didn't look at me. He just stared across the lawn and said, "They're here to hurt you." And suddenly, I knew. This wasn't just about betrayal. This was about something darker, something deliberate. I reached for my purse, heart pounding like it had grown its own pulse. "Ben, what are you talking about?" He still didn't look at me. "I'll explain later. We don't have time. Just trust me. Don't go upstairs. Don't talk to Claire. And don't, for the love of God, be alone." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Is someone watching us?" He gave a quick, barely visible nod. More than one. And that's when I realized something bone deep and terrifying. Ben hadn't just brought me here to support me. He had come to protect me. Because he'd seen something I hadn't. He stood up suddenly, his voice bright, cheery. "Emma, come help me bring out the gift." It was a lie, but a good one. I stood, legs trembling, and followed him toward the side gate, away from the crowd. We made it 3 steps past the hedge when I heard a door slam behind us. Heavy, rushed. I turned over my shoulder and locked eyes with Claire, standing on the porch. Her smile was gone. In its place was something unreadable. Cold, calculating. Like she knew we knew. Ben grabbed my wrist. "Don't stop. Keep walking." I did, my heels digging into the grass, dress catching on twigs. He pulled me past the rose bushes and toward the gravel drive. "Where's your car?" "Down the block," I whispered, breath hitching. "I didn't want to block the driveway." He cursed under his breath. "Okay, we run on 3. Ready?" I nodded, but I wasn't. Not for what came next. Not for the truth I was about to hear. Because whatever my brother knew, whatever had been kept from me all these years, it was about to break open. And the people I once called family, they weren't just pretending anymore. They were hunting. Before everything unraveled, before my brother whispered those words that flipped my world upside down, I thought I had already survived the worst life had to offer. I lived in a quiet neighborhood just outside Savannah, in a cozy brick cottage I'd poured my heart into after the divorce. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. The garden bloomed in spring with lilies and lavender. The kitchen always smelled like cinnamon and coffee. It was peaceful, predictable. And for someone who had once lived on eggshells, that peace meant everything. I taught literature at a small community college, where my students called me Ms. L, and brought me dog-eared copies of their favorite books, asking if I'd read them too. I walked to campus most days, rain or shine, and spent my evenings grading essays while old jazz records played softly in the background. My world was small, but it was safe. Ben lived 2 towns over, in a converted farmhouse with his wife and 2 daughters. We didn't talk every day, but when we did, it was always real. Always warm. He'd been my protector since childhood, the boy who stood between me and our parents' disappointment, who once threw a punch at a kid twice his size for calling me weird. I never asked him to. He just did it. And then there was Claire, my younger sister by 3 years. Claire had always sparkled in a way that drew people in. She was beautiful, sharp, magnetic, the kind of person who could walk into a room and make everyone lean in a little closer. When we were little, she used to sneak into my bed at night and ask me to read her stories by flashlight. We used to pinky swear secrets and dream about moving to New York together. I truly believed we'd be best friends forever, but something shifted when we grew up. Claire became hungrier, for approval, for attention, for everything I didn't seem to need anymore. Our parents adored her. They called her the Phoenix because she always seemed to rise. Meanwhile, I was the caretaker, the sensible one, the one who helped plan holidays and kept our mother's medications straight. Claire chased dreams. I maintained reality. Then came Mark. He was tall, confident, clever in the way that made people feel chosen just by being in his presence. A marketing executive with a polished laugh and designer shoes, Mark Lancaster made everyone believe he had their best interests at heart, including mine. We met at a charity auction my college was co-hosting. He outbid everyone for a signed Hemingway first edition, and when I made a joke about him not knowing Hemingway from a hole in the wall, he laughed. He really laughed, and I remember thinking, maybe I misjudged him. He asked me to dinner that night. I was 34, not desperate, just quietly hopeful. My last relationship had fizzled with more of a sigh than a bang, but Mark made me feel seen. He asked questions no one else had. He remembered what books I liked. He sent handwritten notes after our first date, and flowers that weren't roses. Lilies, my favorite. For the first time in years, I felt like I was stepping into something that could grow. Ben didn't like him. He never said so outright. just raised an eyebrow when Mark was late, or noticeably absent from family gatherings. Claire, on the other hand, loved him. Too much, if I'm honest. She laughed too loudly at his jokes, touched his arm a little too often. But I brushed it off. I was in love, and love makes excuses. We married a year later, in a small ceremony under the oaks behind my parents' house. Claire was my maid of honor. I still have a photo of her straightening my veil, both of us laughing. I used to think that moment was real. Now I wonder if it was already part of her act. At first, married life was a dream, or the illusion of one. Mark took me to art galleries and weekend getaways. He made me feel like a woman who had finally arrived. But over time, the mask began to crack. He started working late. More meetings, more conferences, fewer conversations. When I asked questions, he called me clingy or paranoid. I stopped asking. Then came the little lies. Dinners that didn't happen, charges on our joint card he couldn't explain, the cologne I didn't buy. But it wasn't just the lies. It was the erasure. He'd stop introducing me at events. He'd correct me in front of others. He'd say things like, "That's not what really happened, babe," as if my memories were defective. Slowly, I felt myself shrinking, second-guessing everything, even my own name in a room. Still, I stayed, because that's what I thought love required. That's the assumption I held close. If you work hard enough, love can fix anything. Then one morning I found an email. It was open on his laptop, unintentionally, or maybe carelessly. It wasn't just a message. It was a conversation between Mark and Claire. There was nothing overt, nothing sexual. But it was intimate, familiar, mocking. They'd been talking about me, laughing, planning things without me. Claire called me emotionally slow. Mark wrote, "She still has no clue." Unbelievable. I remember staring at the screen for what felt like hours, heart pounding so loud I thought the neighbors could hear it. I didn't confront him. Not then. Instead, I called Ben. He didn't say, "I told you so." He just said, "You need to get out." And I did. 2 weeks later, I filed for divorce. Mark didn't fight it. He even seemed relieved. The fallout with my family was worse. My mother said I was overreacting. My father muttered something about not making things harder than they needed to be. And Claire? She never denied the emails. She just said, "You always get so emotional, Em. Maybe you misunderstood." That sentence, "maybe you misunderstood," still echoes in my chest sometimes. I didn't go back for holidays after that. Didn't answer Claire's texts or my parents' voicemails. I became someone else. Not hardened, just more careful. And now, 5 years later, I was being asked to step back into the fire. Ben had called me last month, said Mom and Dad were having their 50th anniversary party. Said he'd be there. Said it might be good to come. He didn't say why, but he did say this. Things aren't what they seem. And foolishly, maybe out of hope, maybe just to prove I was stronger, I agreed. What I didn't expect was Mark and Claire. Together, arm in arm, wearing rings, with my family smiling at them like nothing had happened. They hadn't just erased me, they'd replaced me. But that day, at the family party, something shifted again. Because when Ben whispered, "They're here to hurt you," I realized something I never saw before. This wasn't just betrayal, it was a setup. And it had been building for years. Only I was too busy being the good one to see it coming. I used to believe betrayal was loud. A scream, a slam, a shattering of glass. But when the truth finally surfaced, it wasn't loud at all. It was quiet, methodical, surgical. And somehow that made it worse. It happened on a Wednesday. The kind of day so ordinary you don't expect your life to split in two. I had just finished a lecture on Othello, irony of all ironies, betrayal, manipulation, the poison of trust. And I remember telling my students that Shakespeare understood human weakness better than anyone. What I didn't know then was that while I was talking about Iago and Desdemona, My sister was walking into a hotel suite with my husband. Ben called me that night. His voice was strange, tight. "Emma," he said. Not M, not sis, just my full name, like it was official, like something terrible was about to be declared. "There's something you need to see." He sent me a video. No warning, no soft landing, just a file name, Claire, 1080, MP4. I shouldn't have clicked it. I know that now. But I did. The clip was grainy, clearly taken from someone's phone, maybe a doorman or a hotel worker who owed Ben a favor. But it was clear enough. Mark, Claire, laughing, her hand on his chest, his keycard in her fingers, kissing before the elevator doors opened, stepping inside. My brain tried to reject it, rewrite it, reframe it. I told myself it wasn't them. It couldn't be. But it was. The worst part? They looked happy. I sat on the cold tile floor of my kitchen, phone still in hand, and just stared at the screen as if maybe, if I blinked slowly enough, they'd vanish. They didn't. I don't remember much after that. I know I screamed once. I know I threw up in the sink. I know I dropped my phone and left it buzzing on the floor while my cat paced in circles, worried. For 2 days, I didn't leave my house, didn't shower, didn't eat. I just wandered between rooms like a ghost, watching the walls close in, wondering how long I'd been asleep while they turned my life into a lie. I played the video again, and again. It was like stabbing myself with a memory just to confirm I could still bleed. The texts started pouring in. Claire. "Emma, please call me. I can explain." Mark. "Let's talk. Don't make this worse than it is." My mother. "Don't cause a scene. We're family." Every word sliced me open. But I didn't respond. Because what do you say when the two people who were supposed to love you most, your partner, your sister, use your vulnerability like a blueprint for destruction? The collapse didn't come all at once. It came in stages, like a house catching fire room by room. First, the disbelief. I kept thinking, this has to be a mistake. There's some explanation. Something I missed. I told myself maybe they had only just started. Maybe it was emotional, not physical. Maybe I could still be the bigger person. Then came the rage. It was wild and white-hot. I screamed into pillows. I broke a wine glass against the sink. I punched the side of my closet so hard my knuckles bled. I wanted to set everything they'd ever touched on fire. But underneath the rage, there was grief. The kind that sits in your bones. The kind that rewrites who you are. I didn't just lose a husband or a sister. I lost the entire scaffolding of my identity. Every memory now felt contaminated. Every family photo a lie. I stopped trusting myself. I couldn't read people, couldn't tell the difference between affection and manipulation anymore. Every time I went to the grocery store and someone smiled at me, I'd wonder, what do you want from me? What are you hiding? And then, the shame. God, the shame. Like somehow their betrayal was my fault. Like I'd been too naive, too soft, too trusting. Like I should have seen it coming. People don't talk enough about that. How betrayal doesn't just hurt. It humiliates. It turns you into someone you don't recognize. I started waking up in the middle of the night, gasping, like I was drowning in my own mind. I'd stand in the mirror for hours, just looking, trying to see what they saw, trying to figure out what made me so disposable. I froze. I spiraled. I dissociated. And yet, somewhere in the middle of that collapse was clarity. A sliver at first. A voice that whispered, "You didn't deserve this." But I didn't believe it. Not yet. The worst day came 2 weeks later. My mother invited me to brunch. Said she wanted to clear the air. I went. Stupidly. Still hoping someone, anyone, would validate what I was going through. Instead, I found myself sitting across from her and Claire, together, already a team. My mother stirred her tea calmly and said, "Emma, you have to let go of this bitterness. People fall in love. Things happen. Claire didn't even pretend to cry. She just said, "I didn't plan for it to happen, but Mark and we make sense. You and he never really did." That was the moment my grief turned into something else. Not rage, not anymore. Something colder, sharper. Resolve. I stood up, left them with the check, and never spoke to either of them again. Not until the family party 5 years later. By then, I had rebuilt a version of myself. Not whole, but functional. Not trusting, but independent. But that wound, that betrayal, it never stopped pulsing beneath the surface, until Ben leaned in and whispered those words. And suddenly, the past wasn't the past. It was alive. It had been watching me the whole time. I used to think rock bottom was a moment, a crash, a single event you could point to and say, "There, that's when everything fell apart." But it's not like that. It's slower, quieter, like erosion. Like being pulled out to sea by a current you didn't know was there until you're too far gone to scream. After Claire and Mark, after the video and the silence and the shame, I went under. I deleted my social media accounts, blocked numbers, switched jobs, moved out of the house I'd bought with Mark and into a 1-bedroom apartment on the top floor of an old building with no elevator and a leaking window. It was cheaper, less visible. That mattered more to me than the mold in the bathroom. I told everyone I just needed time to myself. But the truth? I didn't want to be found. I stopped answering Ben's calls. Not because I blamed him. I didn't. He had tried to protect me. But I couldn't handle the sound of anyone's voice that remembered who I used to be. The students at my new school were younger, less invested. I started teaching general writing instead of literature. No poetry. No character analysis, just grammar drills and 5-paragraph essays. It felt like a punishment, but I welcomed it. Simpler, quieter, numb. And yet, in that quiet, my mind was loud. I'd lay awake at night, replaying every moment that led to the betrayal. What signs did I ignore? What did I say that gave Claire permission to cross that line? How long had my mother been covering for her? I'd cycle through the memories like crime scene footage, hoping to find the moment where I could have changed the ending. I made bad choices. I dated a man I met at a bookstore just because he reminded me of Mark. Same cologne, same smug little smile. I told myself I was over it, that I just wanted companionship. But it was self-sabotage dressed as healing. When he ghosted me 3 weeks later, I barely felt surprised. I stopped cooking. Ate crackers and hummus for dinner, cereal for lunch. Some days, nothing. I drank too much wine. Alone. Told myself it was just to unwind. I knew it wasn't. I started therapy. 3 sessions in, I quit. The therapist asked me to write a forgiveness letter to my sister. I left the office mid-sentence and never went back. What was there to forgive? That she envied me? That she wanted what I had and didn't care who she hurt to take it? No one ever tells you how rational bitterness can feel. How convincing it is when it says, "You're better off alone." No one can betray you in isolation. And for a while, I believed that voice. Until the night I collapsed in the hallway outside my apartment door. I had been holding a grocery bag too tightly. One of the handles snapped, and a glass jar rolled across the tile and shattered. The sound startled me so much I dropped everything. And then I just sat. Right there. Among the shards. I don't know how long I was on the floor before someone found me. Her name was June. She was my neighbor from 4B. 67. Wore a lavender scarf every day. Used to teach art at the university before her husband died. I'd seen her in passing. Never spoke. She knelt beside me like it was the most natural thing in the world. Didn't ask what happened. Just said, "Come on, let's clean you up." That night, June made me tea. Not the store-bought kind, loose leaf, with mint from her own windowsill garden. She had paintings all over her apartment, messy, bold strokes of color. Nothing delicate, nothing afraid. "I heard you crying through the walls sometimes," she said. "I figured I'd wait for the right moment." I started crying again. June didn't flinch. She just passed me a tissue and said, "Whatever broke you, don't let it own the rest of you." I laughed bitterly. "Too late." "Nope," she said. "You're still breathing. You're still here. You haven't even begun to fight back." That was the first night I felt anything resembling warmth in months. Over the next few weeks, I began visiting June's apartment more often. We didn't talk about Claire or Mark or my family. We just talked about color, about courage, about how pain shapes us but doesn't get to define us. She gave me a canvas one night, told me to paint how I felt. I painted nothing but black. She said, "That's okay. Black's a color too. Keep going." I kept going. I re-enrolled in therapy. A new therapist. One who didn't ask me to write letters. She just listened. Let me sit in silence when I needed to. Let me scream when I didn't know what else to do. I started walking again. Then jogging. Then running. I read books that weren't about betrayal. I reread old ones I loved. I made playlists that made me cry, then ones that made me dance. I started slowly, painfully, rebuilding something that looked like a life, but healing isn't linear. It tricks you. There was a moment, almost a year later, when I thought I was okay. I had made peace with the fact that I might never hear "I'm sorry." I had even begun drafting a speech in my head, the kind you give at imaginary family dinners you'll never attend again. Then came the invitation, an actual paper card, gold-embossed lettering, from Claire and Mark. "We're getting married. Please join us to celebrate our love." I stared at the RSVP line like it was a test I hadn't studied for. They were still together. After everything, they wanted me there. Not because they missed me, but because they wanted to finish what they started, rewriting history with me written out. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't going to end with closure. There would be no apology, no moment of remorse. The people who hurt me were not haunted by it. Only I was. That was the sacrifice. Not revenge, not justice. Letting go of the hope that they'd ever make it right. Letting go of the dream that my family would turn around and say, "We were wrong. We're sorry." I didn't go to the wedding. I didn't even respond. I blocked the number, burned the card, and that night, I painted something new. Reds. Golds. A streak of violet that made no sense but felt like a scar-turned jewel. June said, "Now that's a breakthrough." It didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival. But maybe that was enough for now. It didn't happen overnight. There was no single sunrise where I stood on a cliff, arms outstretched, hair blowing perfectly in the wind, finally free. Healing doesn't care about your cinematic fantasies. It's not pretty, it's not poetic, but it's honest. And eventually it becomes powerful. The woman I was before Mark and Claire, she wasn't weak. She was hopeful, open-hearted, naive maybe. But that wasn't a flaw. It was a kindness that hadn't yet been weaponized. The woman I became after, she was forged. I stopped trying to erase the pain. Instead, I let it educate me. My mornings became sacred. Before the sun rose, I made tea, not coffee tea, and wrote in a battered leather journal. 3 pages every day. No edits, no censoring. Just raw truth. Some days it was angry, others numb, but every word laid bricks beneath my feet, lifting me up from that long gray void I once called home. I started painting again, not just at June's. I bought my own easel, cleared out a space by the window in my apartment, and painted like it was prayer. Not everything was good. Most of it wasn't. But it was mine. Honest. Alive. I hung the messy ones on the wall and signed them anyway. My name. My work. My truth. Then came the students. One of my old literature majors, Sarah, tracked me down through the school directory. She had opened a nonprofit for underprivileged teen girls, and she wanted to start a mentorship program focused on storytelling. "Your class changed how I saw myself," she said. "Would you consider helping us do the same for them?" Something cracked open in me. Not pain, not fear. Something else. Something like purpose. The next week, I sat in a circle with 12 girls between 14 and 17, some shy, some scarred, all of them searching for voice. I told them, "You don't have to be pretty on the page. You just have to be real." They listened. They wrote. They shared poems and letters and entries they'd never shown anyone. And something in me, something dormant, stirred. It was the part that remembered who I was before life tried to silence me. I began teaching workshops again, not just grammar and rules. I taught voice, vulnerability, vision. And in those classrooms, rec centers, libraries, even online at first, I found myself stepping into the light again. People noticed. I noticed. I wore color again. I cut my hair shorter, sharper, like a declaration. I even started seeing someone. Nothing serious. His name was Micah, a high school counselor I met through the nonprofit. Kind eyes, patient hands. He didn't try to fix me. He just listened. Let me unfold in my own time. We didn't talk much about our pasts. But one night I told him everything. I braced myself for the usual response. The awkward silence, the pity. But all he said was, "You must be strong as hell to still be this open," I cried. Right there, in his truck. With my forehead against the window and his hand resting gently on the gear shift, like he knew not to touch me unless I said so. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was safe, and that was something sacred. Even so, I didn't forget. Not the betrayal. Not the erasure. But I no longer carried it like armor. I had changed. And I liked who I was becoming. I reconnected with Ben. Slowly at first, cautious texts, a birthday card, a late-night phone call where neither of us knew how to say what we meant. Eventually, we met for coffee. He looked older, tired. But when he hugged me, it was the same. "I never stopped watching your back," he said. "I know," I whispered. He told me what he'd learned over the years, pieces of the puzzle that had continued unraveling even after I left. Things I hadn't known. Things I hadn't been ready to hear until now. I won't write them here. Not yet. Because they still make my skin crawl. But that conversation made one thing clear. Mark and Claire weren't done. They didn't just betray me. They had been building something on top of me, as if they could thrive by burying me beneath them. And now, after 5 years, they were planning a family reunion. Bigger than the last. Public. Loud. Funded by Mark's new consulting firm, now partnered with a major investor, my father. It was a celebration of family legacy. Their name. Their empire. And guess who was invited to speak? Ben and me. The card came in gold again. The envelope sealed with a wax L. For Lancaster. I stood there, reading the embossed lies, and felt the burn rise behind my ribs. This wasn't just an invitation. It was a power play. They wanted me to show up. To stand there like a prop. To prove to the world that everything was fine now. To erase what really happened. Again. But I wasn't that woman anymore. And that night, I stood in front of my easel, brush in hand, hands trembling but certain, and I painted fire. The Lancaster family estate hadn't changed. Same white columns, same winding gravel path, same hydrangeas choking the front porch like pastel camouflage. I parked down the hill, just as I had 5 years ago, and walked the rest of the way with my head high and my heart anchored in something unshakable. This wasn't a homecoming. It was a reckoning. I wore a navy blue dress, clean lines, no frills. My hair was pinned back. My heels clicked across the stone like punctuation. Inside, the reunion buzzed like a performance. Waiters carried trays of champagne. A jazz trio played near the fireplace. The air smelled like expensive perfume and denial. Everyone was here. Cousins I hadn't seen in years. Former classmates turned business partners. My mother, in pearls. My father, shaking hands like a senator. And in the center of it all, Claire. She turned as I entered. And for a moment, She froze, just enough to confirm what I already knew. She didn't think I'd come. She wore white. Not ivory. White. Like she still believed she was the heroine in this story. Her hand rested on Mark's arm as if he were a trophy she'd earned. He turned too. His face flickered. Surprise, maybe. Or dread. Hard to tell. His smile recovered quickly. But the eyes? The eyes couldn't lie anymore. I didn't walk toward them. I walked past, said hello to my aunt, accepted a glass of sparkling water, made small talk with someone's husband about the weather in Charleston. I wasn't hiding. I was commanding the room without demanding it. And they felt it. I saw it in their posture. They kept checking the door, as if waiting for someone to interrupt the moment they feared was coming. Ben found me near the French doors. He looked sharp. Black suit. Clean shave. But his eyes were nervous. "You sure?" he asked, voice low. I nodded. "I've been sure since the minute I read that invitation." He gave me a slight smile, proud and pained, and stepped back. He knew this wasn't his moment. Mark approached first, alone, a calculated move. "Emma," he said with that practiced voice, warm, sympathetic, false. "I'm glad you came. Truly. It means a lot to the family." I looked at him for a long moment. He waited. Maybe for forgiveness. Maybe for a fight. He got neither. I said nothing. Just tilted my head slightly and held his gaze until he looked away first. Then Claire stepped in. Of course she did. She had always needed to control the narrative. She said, all breathy charm. "I was hoping we could talk, privately." I turned to face her fully. She looked strained, pretty, as always, but brittle. Like she'd built herself from pieces of me and wasn't sure how long the glue would hold. The room seemed to hush around us. People weren't listening. Not yet. But they were watching. Claire reached out to touch my arm. I didn't move. She stopped halfway, her fingers hovering midair like a prayer she'd forgotten how to finish. "I know we've had differences," she began. "Is that what you call it?" I asked softly. Her throat bobbed. "Emma, I didn't plan any of it. You have to know that. Things just happened." I studied her. The woman who once crawled into my bed as a child and begged me to protect her from monsters under the bed. Only to grow into one. "Mark and I, it's real," she added, eyes glistening. "And I truly believe that love finds a way." There it was. The script. The line she'd rehearsed. As if this was some great romantic tragedy and not a theft wrapped in a smile. I stepped closer, not to intimidate, but to see. All of her. And what I saw was smallness. Loneliness. Someone who wanted what I had, not because she valued it, but because it validated her. "You know," I said, calm and low, "if you had just asked, I might have shared anything with you. My secrets, my fears, even my grace." Her lips parted. She wasn't expecting kindness. Not here. Not now. "But you didn't want what I had," I continued. "You wanted to be me, and now look at you." She blinked. Her eyes wavered. Standing there, wearing my past like it's couture, I whispered, "and still starving." Silence. A hush rippled through the crowd. Not from what I said, but from what I was. I wasn't angry. I wasn't broken. I was whole. And they saw it. Every single one. Claire stepped back, eyes wet now. Mark tried to grab her hand. She pulled away. Just enough to notice. Ben appeared beside me again. Not to save me, just to stand witness. I set my empty glass on a tray and turned to leave. I'd said what I came to say, without yelling, without groveling, and without letting them take anything more from me. But just as I reached the front hall, my father intercepted me. He looked old, tired, haunted. "Emma," he said. Not kiddo, not pumpkin, just my name. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then said, "Your mother misses you." I nodded once. "Tell her I don't miss being lied to." He winced, but didn't deny it. And then, for the first time, I saw it. In his eyes. The truth. He had known. About the affair. About the manipulation. Maybe not everything. But enough. And he chose silence. Not for malice, but because it was easier. I gave him one last look. Not cruel, not cold. Just clear. Then I stepped out into the night. Cool breeze. Quiet sky. Ben joined me on the lawn, hands in his pockets. "You did it?" he said. "No," I replied, smiling. "I undid it." And just like that, I walked away. Not toward revenge, not toward war, but toward myself. Some mornings I still wake up before the sun. Not because I'm haunted, but because the quiet feels like a promise now, not a punishment. I sit by the window with a blanket around my shoulders, steam curling from my tea, and I breathe. No more racing thoughts. No more what-ifs. Just the sound of wind through trees. And my own heartbeat. Steady. Peace doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in fragments. In the way you speak to yourself when no one's listening. In the grace you give your own reflection after years of wincing. In the moments when you finally stop bleeding for people who never asked you to heal. A few weeks after the confrontation, I went back to therapy. Not because I was unraveling, but because I wasn't. And I wanted to understand why. I told my therapist about the look on Claire's face when I spoke to her, how it wasn't fear or regret, but recognition. She had seen, maybe for the first time, what she could have been, if she hadn't let envy steer the ship. She saw herself in me, I said. My therapist smiled gently. "No, Emma. She saw what she cost herself. I've thought about that a lot. How some people will burn the bridge just to make sure they're standing on the prettier side, even if it leaves them alone. But I'm not alone anymore. Micah and I still see each other. Slowly. Softly. With no expectations. We hike together. We cook on Sundays. Sometimes we read in silence side by side, and that's enough. It's not fireworks. It's not chaos. It's just safe. And that feels radical after a life of proving, pleasing, and enduring. My art has changed too. I paint in color now. Not just fiery reds or screaming blacks, but sage, marigold, ocean blue. I sold a few pieces last month. One gallery owner said my work feels like exhale. That's how I knew I was on the right path. The mentorship program grew. We got funding. I now lead workshops twice a week, and we've expanded into 3 schools. The girls write poems that make me cry in parking lots. They tell stories they were never allowed to speak aloud. They are bold, brave, and every time they share, they reclaim a piece of themselves. I don't teach them how to write. I teach them how to return to themselves. Last weekend, I burned the last box. It had been under my bed for years, filled with photos, letters, old receipts, scraps of a life I no longer lived. I took it out to the backyard, lit a fire in the small pit June gave me before she moved to Arizona, and one by one, I let each piece go. The wedding photo, the RSVP card, a birthday card from my mother that said, "We love you," in her handwriting. A sentence I no longer needed to believe. And then the letter. I'd written it 3 years ago, but never sent it. To Claire. 12 pages long. Messy, furious, grieving. I held it for a long time, read the first few lines, then smiled, and fed it to the flames. Not because I didn't mean it, but because I didn't need her to understand me anymore. I understood myself, and that was enough. Ben calls me every week now. We meet for coffee. He sends photos of his girls and jokes about how they've already developed my stubborn streak. I tell him to blame genetics. He laughs. But there's always that softness in his eyes, the one that says I would have gone to war for you if you asked. And maybe I did. In my own way. I drove by the Lancaster estate once last month, just to see. It looked the same, manicured, grand, empty, but something about it seemed smaller, like a stage after the curtain has fallen. All lights, no meaning, just a story that already ended. I didn't stop, didn't look for faces in the windows. I just nodded to the ghosts and kept driving. Somewhere, Claire still wakes up in her own curated world. Somewhere, Mark is still performing charm for people who confuse it with character. And somewhere, my parents still tell themselves they raised strong daughters. Maybe they did, just not in the way they imagined. I am not bitter. Not anymore. Because bitterness is a cage, and I've learned how to fly. The truth is, I will never get an apology. Not the kind I deserve, but I got something better. Distance, perspective, freedom. And now, every night, I light a candle. A quiet ritual. Not for them. For me. It sits on the windowsill next to my journal and my paintbrushes. The flame is small, but it's steady. And it's mine.